Imagine being the strongest in your village, mindlessly following the commands of your village leader. But when you're betrayed by the very people you grew up with, you agree to retrieve the elixir of life in a mysterious paradise in exchange for a free and fulfilling life. The anime opens with a beheading, an execution that requires a high degree of skill, but strangely, something goes wrong. As the executioner swings his blade, he's horrified to see his blade snap upon clashing with our MC's neck, Gabimaru. Gabimaru is clearly depressed, wondering why he still has to suffer, especially living a life filled with bloodshed. Taken back to his cell, we see Sajiri Yamada, a seaman, profiling Gabimaru, uttering that Gabimaru was born a shinobi in the village of Awagakure, and breaking a blade with his flesh isn't too uncommon for someone from Awagakure. Sajiri asks if Gabimaru can show off some of his ninjutsu, but Gabimaru refuses, eventually taken out to be executed by burning. Gabimaru acknowledges that death by burning is quite tortuous, as the victim is forced to endure pain until the toxic fumes take them out. But in the present, the men seem to be having trouble with burning Gabimaru, as it seems only his clothes are affected. In his cell, Sajiri is forced to avert her eyes whilst recording the events that happened today, asking Gabimaru about his past. Gabimaru says his parents were slain when he was a child by his village chief, a mystery he has yet to solve. Plus, as a shinobi, Gabimaru had no emotions and hunted as he was told to. Sajiri asks how Gabimaru was captured, hearing that Gabimaru wanted to leave his village, but his fellow shinobi ended up betraying him, something Gabimaru believes the village chief had orchestrated. Up next, Gabimaru is to be executed by bulls, a method where the victim is ripped apart by two mighty bulls. When Gabimaru's execution starts, he subtly pulls back against the bulls, completely ruining his execution, but this makes Sajiri call out Gabimaru for lying, seeing as he clearly has the will to live. Sajiri asks for more information on the reason why Gabimaru wanted to leave his village, and seeing as there is no point in hiding it, Gabimaru reveals that since he was the strongest in his village, the village chief had asked for his daughter, Yui, to marry Gabimaru. Gabimaru was disgusted at how naive Yui was, annoyed that Yui had tried teaching him proper etiquette and manners, and so Gabimaru left the village to get away from her. When Gabimaru had told the village chief of his departure, the village chief had requested Gabimaru take on one final task, but that was when his fellow shinobis had cornered and captured him. Gabimaru says his life isn't as interesting as others had hoped, but as Sajiri heads through town later that night, she is warned by her fellow executioner to be wary of Gabimaru, especially since his alias is Gabimaru the Hollow, a man with no emotions. Apparently, there are rumors of an elixir of life from Shinsenkyo that can grant anyone immortality. And with Sajiri hearing that even 20 men could barely capture Gabimaru, she deduces that Gabimaru is still hiding something. The next day, the executioners attempt to boil Gabimaru alive with some searing oil, but even such a horrific method doesn't faze Gabimaru. Seeing as it's finally her time to shine, Sajiri asks for Gabimaru to be escorted underground, and upon entering into a creepy-looking room, Sajiri reveals herself to be a sword tester from Edo. Sajiri dawns from the Yamada clan, a group of people that test out swords and act as executioners, and seeing as Sajiri is a woman capable of being bestowed the Seaman role, Gabimaru suddenly flinches as he can detect killing intent from Sajiri. Feeling fear, Gabimaru suddenly breaks free from his cuffs, and as Sajiri appears behind him with a slash, Gabimaru instinctively leaps back to evade. Finally shedding blood, Gabimaru continues to evade Sajiri's advances, listening in as Sajiri declares that a person's true nature is revealed right before their death. Having pulled together Gabimaru's history, Sajiri declares that Gabimaru still wants to live, especially since he loves his wife. Suddenly hit with a wave of emotions, Gabimaru remembers the fond memories he had with Yui, becoming enraged as he steals a sword only to begin clashing blades with Sajiri. Sajiri presses further by asking why Gabimaru continues to lie to himself. But Gabimaru refuses to listen, flashing back to a time when Yui had pointed out how kind Gabimaru was to her. When Gabimaru had reminded Yui that he had been hollow his entire life, Yui says a hollow man would have never accepted her, especially with such a horrific scar on her face. Yui knew that men in her village are sent off to hunt and gather, whilst women are to stay at home and bear children. Something her father recognized, hence, he was the reason why Yui had her scar. To prove she was right, Yui had given Gabimaru a quick kiss, making Gabimaru blush, and is the reason why Yui loves Gabimaru. In the present, Gabimaru begins crying that he is irredeemable, all whilst memories of Yui accepting him for who he is flashes through his mind. Gabimaru had wanted to quit his shinobi life and live alongside Yui peacefully, but Gabimaru knew his lineage along with the village chief would never allow such a life, making Gabimaru cry that he can never be normal. Luckily, Sajiri shows off an official pardon that will grant Gabimaru full immunity to all of his crimes along with full protection moving forward. Before Sajiri can grant such an offer to Gabimaru, she says Gabimaru must first visit Shinsenkyo, a place people consider paradise or heaven to retrieve something. In the past, travelers had reached Shinsenkyo by traveling southwest beyond the Ryukyu Kingdom, all baffled by the gorgeous and dreamlike scenery, just like the paradise they had envisioned. When the shoguns had heard that the elixir of life could be found on Shinsenkyo, they sent more parties to search for the item. But when the parties returned, strange flowers were seen growing from the men's corpses. Such a tale baffles Gabimaru, but Sajiri says that all sorts of criminals will be sent to the island to search for the elixir, and the one that is successful will be given a free life. To top things off, Sajiri says that the report shows that Yui has hopes that Gabimaru will return one day, having shut herself off from everyone, something that fires Gabimaru up. When the other executioners call out Sajiri for not executing Gabimaru, they all draw their spears ready to slay Gabimaru themselves. But with a single exhale, Gabimaru sets his body ablaze with his ninjutsu. In the blink of an eye, Gabimaru diffuses the situation by taking down the surrounding men, only to agree to help Sajiri track down the elixir of life. Sajiri says they'll first head to Edo, and with Gabimaru agreeing to take on whatever comes his way, he wishes for Yui to wait for the day he reunites with her. In the past, Sajiri's father, Kichiji Yamada Seaman, was once tasked with beheading a convicted storyteller, and with clean precision, Sajiri's father was able to lob off the storyteller's head. Strangely, even though their head was cut off, the storyteller continued to tell a story, a feat Sajiri wishes to replicate. As Sajiri grew up, she began practicing her executions, naturally garnering attention seeing as she was female, but sadly with every person she slain, Sajiri began to feel more guilty. Aizen Yamada, a seaman, had advised Sajiri to not fear her actions, but during her next execution, Sajiri had performed her duties as normal, but Aizen utters that the fear within her is causing Sajiri to give the convicted a painful death. Sajiri has since wondered how she can become more fearless, wondering if there is someone she could execute without feeling any emotions. But in the present day, we see various criminals gathered near the ocean. The announcer first introduces the 11th Taishigun, Tokugawa Nariyoshi, but hearing that name, the gathered criminals begin booing the man. Off to the side, Sajiri notices that Tanio Saikichi, a burglar amongst the crowd, along with Nikamaru the arsonist, Kido Shuken the murderer, plus various other deadly criminals. Silencing the criminals, the announcer says the person who successfully retrieves the elixir of life will be given a life pardon in the form of a certificate, a statement that catches everyone's attention. Sajiri suddenly spots Adachi Matagoro, a criminal that targets women and children for pleasure, someone that makes Sagiri wonder if she would feel guilty putting down. At the same time, we see Gabimaru bored out of his mind, but suddenly Yuzuraha, a fellow criminal, says it's a pleasure to meet Gabimaru, a little disappointed he isn't as big or scary looking as she expected. When the announcer tries telling everyone about what they can expect when heading to Shinsenkyo, the criminals all cry that they're bored, prompting Aoki to ask the criminals to take off their masks, revealing the corpse of their former sergeant who visited the paradise. Aoki says the body of their sergeant is no longer human, and when the sergeant returned there were lumps on their body that sprouted into flowers. Aoki reveals that 60 of their men had also gone missing on their most recent expedition, something that begins to freak out some of the criminals, but Nirugai speaks up, asking if there truly is an elixir of life to be found on the island. Aoki says the criminals are allowed to refuse the offer if they want, prompting a tattooed-looking man to leave the scene, but instantly Aizen takes his life. Aoki declares that each criminal will have a member of the Yamada Asiman clan monitoring them, and if the criminals act up, the Yamada members will be free to put them down. Aoki adds that the criminals won't be able to leave the island by boat if their monitors aren't with them. But to make things worse, Tokugawa orders for the criminals to decide who will board the boats and head to paradise, giving Chobei Aza the cue to eliminate one of his competitors. Seeing as neither Aoki nor any other shogun is against Chobei's actions, the criminals suddenly start a massive brawl, each slaying each other with underhand tactics, all whilst Gabimaru patiently observes everyone. Aoki is weirded out when he sees Tokugawa enjoying the bloodshed before him. And when Tokugawa asks for the criminals, he should be looking forward too. One of the shoguns starts off by pointing out how talented Chobei is, having established a bandit village in the mountains of Io at such a young age. Next is Yuzuriha, who is a kunoichi and was part of the invasion of Sajua Castle. As for Gantetsu Tamiya, he is well known for his masterful swordplay. Finally is Rokuruda, the giant monster that seems to be unfazed by the surrounding violence. But when the shogun points out that Gabimaru is supposed to be the most deadly of them all, we see that Gabimaru has yet to slay anyone. Following Sajiri, she suddenly hears Aizen calling her out for being afraid, reminding Sajiri that her weaknesses will only handicap her when they arrive on the island. Aizen declares that Sajiri isn't fit to wield a sword, reminding Sajiri of her upbringing as members of the Yamada clan at a very young age are tasked with testing swords, beheading criminals, and making medicine from corpses. Sadly, Sajiri was always bullied by other kids, all mocking her for being the daughter of the so-called neck-chopper cannibal Asa. Even though Sajiri tried suppressing her emotions, she was naturally drawn to the sword, strangely able to see disturbing reflections of the truth in the blade she wields. In the present, we see 3 criminals rally together to escape their entrapment, all declaring that they'll attack Sajiri and steal her blade. Before Aizen can intervene, Sajiri offers to put them down, stealing her resolve even though the souls of those she's slain still scare her. As Sajiri easily decapitates the 3 attacking criminals, she is suddenly surprised to hear Gabimaru confront Tokugawa, asking why they have to slay others to go on the expedition. Annoyed, Aoki asks a fellow criminal to slay Gabimaru in exchange for a guaranteed spot to the island. But as the criminal tosses a rock towards Gabimaru, Gabimaru easily dodges, only to ask the criminal if he feels bad for taking another's life. When the criminal says he could care less, Gabimaru gets serious, declaring he'll slay those who try to take his freedom. In an instant, Gabimaru begins dismantling the weaklings before him, taking one life after the other, even accidentally breaking free from their entrapment, only to continue his brawl in the nearby ocean. As the blood from the corpses stain Gabimaru and the ocean around him, the onlookers are disturbed by what they see, but Sajiri suddenly realizes what she was missing. Sajiri says she has been afraid to take the lives of others, when she should develop the resolve to shoulder the lives she has taken, just like what Gabimaru has been doing. As Sajiri sheds some tears, she announces that she will be the one to put Gabimaru down, and with that, Aoki announces the 10 participants that will be boarding the ships, starting with Chobi the Bandit King, Gantetsu the Sword Dragon, Kain the Hunter, Nurugai of Sanka, Horobu the Killing Prayer, Gabimaru the Hollow, Akajinu the Cannibal Courtesan, Yuzuriha of Keishu, Makaya Moro the Apostate, and Rokuroda the Giant. The next day, the criminals are given their Yamada monitor, only for everyone to board a ship heading straight for Shinsenkyo, Paradise Island. In the past, the chief of a Wagakure village showed off his immortality by allowing himself to be punctured and pierced by all sorts of weapons, saying that he had acquired his powers from a land across the ocean. As the gang arrive on the island, we see Gabimaru and Sajiri split off from the other members, both beginning their trek all whilst admiring the beautiful scenery around them. Gabimaru tells Sajiri to stay alert, especially since the surrounding plants and animals seem out of place. And as Gabimaru breaks free from his binds, Sajiri says she has been given strict instructions to have the criminals tie up their hands during their time on the island. Gabimaru says Sajiri is being too picky, plus their rations will only last them 3 days, but Sajiri draws her blade, reminding Gabimaru that she will execute him if he disobeys her. Seeing as he has no choice, he allows Sajiri to tie his hands up, but suddenly a massive steel ball clobbers Gabimaru. Revealed to be Kyun taking out his competition, everyone is surprised to see Gabimaru unfazed by Kyun's powerful blow, but Sajiri recognizes Kyun to be a warrior monk obsessed with wielding weapons. Rumor has it that Kyun has stolen 100 weapons from those he slaughtered, but Sajiri demands to know why Kyun's arms aren't tied, asking Kishu what he is doing. Kishu scolds Sajiri for being a stickler for rules, especially since the criminal's hand can be retied once they reboard the ships. And to make things worse, Kishu tries pointing out how lowly ranked Sajiri is, but Sajiri stops him before he can. Kyun is annoyed everyone is ignoring, choosing to unveil his toolbox filled with weapons, as he creepily announces that he'll test out his new weapons on Gabimaru. Gabimaru says the others will get a head start if they spend their time fighting, but Kyun could care less, especially since Kishu and Sadri have allowed their duel. As Sadri asks Gabamaru to tie up his hands, Kyun takes the chance to rush Gabamaru, but all of his weapons break upon colliding with Gabamaru. When Gabamaru finishes tying his own hands, he uses one of Kyun's poles to propel Kyun into the air, and seeing as Kyun's weapons have all been tossed into the air as well, Gabamaru locks onto one in particular. With a single kick, Gabamaru sends one of Kyun's own weapons directly into Kyun's stomach, all watching as Kyun collapses onto the ground. Sadly, Kyun is revealed to have sewn layers of protection into his own skin, surviving Gabamaru's attack, only to get pumped up for their brawl. Sadly, Gabamaru wipes the floor with Kyun, completely skewering the monster with his very own weapons. Seeing as his job is finished, Kishu chooses to decapitate Kyun and bring back his head as proof to leave the island. But before Kishu leaves, he warns Sadri that she is quite unlucky. Kishu says the moment they arrived at the island, all the criminals had reverted to their twisted ways to survive, some trying to slay each other, whilst others attempted to befriend each other. Kishu reminds Sadri that the criminals will do whatever they want to survive, confusing Sadri since the criminals should follow the shogun's rules if they want to be pardoned. But Kishu says surviving is all that matters when they're on this island. Kishu offers to set Sadri free by putting Gabamaru down, but before Kishu can draw his blade, Gabamaru appears before him, declaring he doesn't want to waste time fighting a nobody. As Gabamaru and Sadri prepare to leave, Kishu says he predicts things will change heavily in a few hours, and as we cut to Aizen, we see him busy tying up his boat. Seeing an opening, Rokuroda appears before Aizen, forcing Aizen to draw his blade, but upon seeing his sword shatter upon reaching Rokuroda's skin, Aizen is ultimately eliminated. Next up is Horobu, who is slain by Chobei. As for Akajinu, she is dispatched by Cheyenne, all whilst Yuzuriha and Mikaya have both been slain. Kishu tells Gabamaru that a messenger made contact with a new Iwagakure, and rumor has it that they'll be making their way to the paradise, alerting Gabamaru. As for Sadri, Kishu says that this expedition is most likely a way to elect the next head of their clan. With that final warning, Kishu takes his leave, and with Sadri wondering what type of person Gabamaru truly is, she is suddenly forced to block a strike from Gabamaru's blade. Gabamaru admits he was trying to put down Sadri painlessly, flashing back to the moment when the village chief slaughtered Gabamaru's parents, having asked to leave his village after giving birth to Gabamaru. Gabamaru remembers the chief, instructing Gabamaru to brush aside emotions to avoid being weak. And as Sadri demands to know why Gabamaru has turned on her, Gabamaru says he has to find the elixir before the Iwagakure clan arrive on the island. Gabamaru apologizes since he needs to take down Sadri, seeing as she is burdening him. But strangely, Sadri nor Gabamaru can muster up the courage to take the other's life, both wondering what is wrong with themselves. Flashing back, we see Yui asking Gabamaru to embrace his emotions, especially since courage comes from someone being honest with how they feel. But after meeting Yui, Gabamaru had noticed his emotions getting in the way of his hunting. As Sadri continues to duel Gabamaru, he opts to use his hands to take on Sadri, but his emotions prevent him from dealing the final blow. With each blow, we see Gabamaru pulling his punches, cursing himself for being so weak. Stealing his resolve, he manages to shatter Sadri's blade, but when he attempts to cut her down, Sadri manages to save herself by blocking with her sheath. Sadri calls out Gabamaru for being pathetic, and seeing as he has no other choice, Gabamaru manages to mount Sadri, readying himself to don his hollow form. With every ounce of hatred in his body, Gabamaru relies on his instincts to plunge his blade into Sadri, completely entranced by the village chief's influence. But still he is unable to take Sadri's life. Strangely, memories of Yui sway Gabamaru to drop his blade, but this makes Gabamaru tremble as he fears his emotions will prevent him from reuniting with Yui. Sadri corrects Gabamaru, as she believes Gabamaru has become far more stronger now, especially since he is attempting to change. With Sadri's words hitting home for Gabamaru, she manages to convince Gabamaru to sheath his blade, both calling a truce as Sadri says she wants to see Gabamaru change for the better. Elsewhere, we follow Fuchi and Gantetsusai encountering some strange-looking statues, but when a butterfly lands and stings Gantetsusai's hands, Gantetsusai gets a strange feeling. Instantly severing his own hand, Gantetsusai points out the disturbing human face on the butterfly, and just as Gantetsusai predicted, his lobbed-off hand begins to sprout flowers. At that moment, the island begins to rumble as various creatures begin to flock around the intruders of their land, forcing everyone to stay on high alert as strange anomalies make themselves known. In the past, no one would mess with Gantet Sasai as he had honed his swordplay masterfully, even drawing the attention of Lord Tatsumi, who recruited Gantet Susai as one of his officers. Gantet Susai agreed, seeing as he was given a place to stay and food, but during an evening of drinks with Tatsumi, Tatsumi had questioned if Gantet Sasai was even capable of slaying a dragon. Pissed, Gantet Sasai had destroyed the dragon carving Tatsumi had owned, ultimately putting a bounty on Gantet Sasai as Tatsumi sent his men to arrest Gantet Sasai. Hearing that Gantet Sasai will return one day and mess with Tatsumi more, Fuchi is weirded out by Gantet Sasai's reason for living. Gantet Susai asks what the tools Fuchi had brought with him, but Fuchi brushes aside the question, declaring that he is ranked 9 amongst his peers. Fuchi says the tools he's brought are for dissection, swiftly drawing his blade, which alerts Gantet Sasai, all whilst ordering Gantet Sasai to not look down on him. Seeing Fuchi's resolve, Gantet Susai simply begins to head through the forest, making Fuchi ask what Gantet Susai has planned. Gantet Susai announces that he'll start off by eliminating his competition, something Fuchi had expected, especially since these expeditions are like creating insect poison, with the most poisonous insects surviving till the very end. Back in the present, we see Gabamaru and Sajiri prepare to face off against a fish-looking monster with prayer beads, both weirded out by the island's inhabitants. When the fish sends multiple arms after Gabamaru, Gabamaru is forced to evade, landing a lethal kick on the fish's head. Sadly, the monster manages to grab hold of Gabamaru, slamming him onto the ground. Sajiri tries backing Gabamaru up, but Gabamaru orders Sajiri to stay back, reminding her he is basically invincible. Seeing as the fish is unfazed by the hole in its head, Gabamaru remembers Rule 5 of the Shinobis, recognizing he shouldn't engage with unknown enemies. Distracted by Sajiri, Gabamaru is binded and tossed around once more, but before he can give Sajiri the order to flee with him, our duo realize they've been surrounded by smiling monsters in all directions. Sajiri can't help but feel lightheaded, checking to see what Gabamaru plans to do, but seeing as there is no way out, Gabamaru gets serious. Igniting himself with his flames, Gabamaru begins dismantling the monsters around him, crying out that he needs to survive no matter what. Entranced by the scenery around her, Sajiri barely manages to evade a monster that has snuck up on her, but having let her guard down, Sajiri is suddenly surrounded by smaller-looking creatures. Taking note of Sajiri's predicament, Gabamaru reasons he should just let Sajiri be slain, but his emotions refuse to allow such a thing, forcing Gabamaru's body to move and rescue Sajiri. Before Sajiri can thank Gabamaru, a tentacle from the fish monster attempts to strike Gabamaru from behind, but Genji appears, slaying the fish monster. Senta and Yuzuriha appear alongside Genji, all impressed. Gabamaru was able to hold off the smiling creatures, but as Gabamaru thanks them for saving him, he asks why Yuzuriha has 2 people monitoring her. Yuzuriha asks Gabamaru to not be so frightened, especially since she is a fellow ninja, and when Yuzuriha tries seducing Gabamaru, Gabamaru instantly avoids her seduction tactics. Yuzuriha says their team of 5 will give them a greater chance at survival, but Sajiri asks why Yuzuriha has 2 people with her. Genji introduces himself as a rank 8 seaman, revealing that his original criminal Mikaya was seduced and slain by Yuzuriha, so he reasoned he should help watch over her. Sajiri accuses Genji of being seduced by Yuzuriha, all while Senta introduces himself as the rank 5 amongst their cohort. Seeing as there may be greater monsters to slay, everyone agrees to team up, but when Yuzuriha tries getting all touchy with Gabamaru, he once again pushes her away. Hurt, Yuzuriha manages to trip and pull Gabamaru in close, reminding Gabamaru that only one of them can return with the elixir, therefore they should make the most of their time together. Gabamaru wonders why they should trust Yuzuriha moving forward, but Yuzuriha offers up the intel they've gathered, declaring that the bugs on the island are the most dangerous of them all. Apparently, the human-faced bugs can poison people whilst causing them to hallucinate, something Yuzuriha found out when she used Mikaya as a test subject. As for the centipedes and other creatures, they're basically harmless, another revelation thanks to Mikaya. To top things off, Yuzuriha had played dead to lure and slay Mikaya. Sena adds that most of the statues on the island are a mix of Buddhist and Taoist designs, strange since both religions are quite different, and seeing as there's more information they'll need to gather, Yuzuriha promises to disclose anything she knows. Gabimaru demands to know why Yuzuriha is so desperate to cooperate with them. Hearing that Yuzuriha has a younger sister with an incurable disease, and in order to provide for her sister, Yuzuriha became a shinobi and joined a prestigious clan. Immediately, Gabimaru calls Yuzuriha out for fabricating her past. Something Yuzuriha admits is true, as she says she simply doesn't want to die young. Realizing how strange Yuzuriha is, Gabimaru demands to know what she did to Mikaya. But Yuzuriha refuses to disclose the experiments she performed on the poor soul. Gabimaru says he'll need to keep an eye on Yuzuriha. But as the gang discuss their next course of action, we see Sadri off to the side questioning how she can help the team. Feeling strange and lightheaded, Sadri suddenly collapses, only for us to cut to Toma, who is an outsider that was acknowledged by the Yamada clan for his exceptional swordplay. Aizen said Toma needed to execute someone to be an official member of their clan, ultimately allowing Toma to request that Chobei be the person he executed, revealing that Chobei is actually Toma's big brother. When Toma had told Chobei, he only needed to retrieve the elixir to be pardoned for life. Chobei immediately accepted, cutting to the present day, where Chobei is seen manically tearing through the statue like monsters. Toma highly respects his big brother, even praising him for staying strong when the lord they served in the Edo castle became corrupt. To make things worse, their mother had passed due to their poverty, and their father was executed alongside the corrupt lord. Luckily, Chobei was a smart boy, having one day been captured alongside Toma by some bandits. But instantly Chobei was able to charm his way into working with the bandits. Over time, Chobei was caught, but even still Chobei had sacrificed himself so Toma could live a good life and return to rescue him. Seeing the unlimited swarm of monsters approaching them, Chobei instructs Toma to flee with him. And as our brotherly duo duck and weave past the creatures, Toma ends up getting caught. Sadly, Chobei leaves Toma to fend for himself, something Toma doesn't fault Chobei for doing as he makes his final stand, but surprisingly Chobei returns to help, having retrieved a bigger axe from a monster's corpse. As a soul projectile scrapes Chobei, the duo suddenly spot even more horrific monsters surrounding them, freaking Toma out when the monsters begin to speak. Chobei says he's had enough of the creatures rambling, choosing to go berserk as he enters into a frenzied state, only to carve up the monsters. Toma remembers that his big brother will always be a beacon of hope for him, both agreeing to slay everyone else and claim the elixir for themselves. But Toma wonders how they'll be able to fend off their other competitors. In her dreams, Sadri can only picture her father's disappointed face, but luckily, she awakens to see Genji watching over her. Genji says they've taken shelter in a cave and that Sadri shouldn't move since she is still recovering from the butterfly's poison. But she ignores Genji's advice, choosing to peep her head outside. Surprisingly, the other three are quite nonchalant, with Gabimaru making dinner, Sita mending the team's clothing, and Yuzuriha lazing around. Seeing as Sadri has awoken, Sita says they can continue their journey whilst they discuss their next course of action. And when Gabimaru shows off the food he had mashed together using the surrounding plants and seeds, Yuzuriha can't help but be disgusted. Regardless, Gabimaru says he had scouted the island whilst foraging, declaring that no location stood out to him. Yuzuriha asks if Gabimaru would be able to guess where the elixir is, but Gabimaru lies and says he only has the sketch of the elixir given to them to go on. Gabimaru adds that the plants are mainly combinations of ones found on the mainland, and seeing as they're near Ryukyu, there could be flowers that Gabimaru has never seen before. Strangely, Gabimaru reveals that some of the plants around them resembled the people that were previously sent to the island, a horrifying realization that makes Yuzuriha ask if Gabimaru fed them the corpses of their predecessors. Gabimaru says he didn't, but wonders if the mandarin plant he found could be the elixir. Sadly, Senta says the original idea of the elixir came from their interpretations, so their best bet would be to figure out what created the stone statues first. Sadri says she is still creeped out seeing as the wildlife is too dangerous for normal species to survive on the island. And strangely, there were no reproductive organs on the creatures they slayed, plus they resembled gods that were created using human and animal parts. As the group tries to wrap their heads around the phenomena they've been facing, Gabimaru declares that such immortal beings would indicate that the elixir is real, but first they must figure out where the monsters live. That evening, Sadri is still amazed an entire day has yet to pass, but suddenly Genji asks Sadri to leave the island, declaring that as a daughter of the Yamada clan, she should focus on giving birth to their future generation. Sajiri says she'll stay and fulfill her duty, but Genji calls out Sajiri for losing her sword granted to her by the clan, reminding Sajiri that she doesn't have the heart to put down Gabimaru if the time comes. Genji says Sajiri's skills as a sword tester and executioner will do her no good in battle, but Senta appears questioning if it'll be easy to return to their main boat, seeing as most don't make it out alive. Cutting over to the rank 10 Tenza, we see him and Nurugai attempt to escape the island and return to the main boat, but Nurugai says Tenza is dumb for using brute strength to fight the currents in the ocean. Nurugai says he won't be able to return to land safely, seeing as he doesn't have the elixir, but Tenza says he'll speak to the shoguns, intriguing Nurugai. When the duo spot the main boat in the distance, they jump in joy, but eerily they realize they've discovered the shipwrecks of all the previous boats that failed to escape the island. In the fog of war, a creepy silhouette is seen spying on them, and when Tenza draws his sword, the creature horrifically attacks with its tentacles. Managing to evade and leap onto the shipwrecks, Nurugai says that Tenza's shiny sword is showing the monster where they are, and seeing as they need to flee from the eldritch horror chasing after them, both desperately search for a usable boat. Nurugai still remembers the moment when his grandpa had asked Nurugai to survive no matter what, and it's revealed that Nurugai was the one who tried helping some samurais that were lost in the forest. But when they discovered Nurugai's village in the mountains, they slaughtered them, all seeing as the village wouldn't submit to them. Nurugai was the only one taken alive, ultimately meeting Tenza, who believed an innocent child shouldn't be executed, hence he was offered the chance to go free if he finds the elixir. But Nurugai wondered if he should live on to preserve his bloodline or snuff himself out to atone for his sins. Horrifically, the duo run into a malformed-looking Kishu, making Tenza cry out, seeing as Kishu is unresponsive. Out of nowhere, the monster's tentacle tears Kishu's body into two, only for multiple other tentacles to entrap our duo in a ring. Seeing Kishu's corpse, Nurugai is reminded of his grandpa's last moments, suddenly falling onto his knees as he asks that Tenza leave him and flee. When a tentacle rushes towards Nurugai, Tenza severs the tentacle only to demand Nurugai explain himself. But Nurugai says the Sanka convention he grew up and instructed him to live for the mountain and village. With Tenza blocking another attack from the creatures, Tenza asks Nurugai to explain why he doesn't want to flee, but this annoys Nurugai as he sees Tenza is putting his body on the line to protect him. As the creatures begin to swarm our duo, Tenza continues to hold them off, demanding to know if Nurugai wants to live. Suddenly struck with the fond memories he had with his gramps, Nurugai cries that he wants to live, prompting Tenza to toss him a sword as they both fight their way toward a stray boat off in the distance. As the evening sun appears, we see that Nurugai and Tenza have successfully escaped their demise and made it back to the island, but they fear that all the surrounding currents only lead back to the island. Tenza does remember the lone samurai that made it back to the island, declaring they'll search for that route once they get cleaned off, but upon seeing Nurugai's girlish figure, Tenza realizes that Nurugai had been a girl all along. Nurugai says she's fallen for Tenza, but as we cut back to the others, Genji is seen storming off as he says Sajiri is expected to leave tomorrow morning. Alone with Senta, Senta says he half agrees with Genji as Sajiri seems to be the only one able to tame Gabimaru, something that makes Senta ask how the two got so close. Sajiri decides to hide Gabimaru's past from the others, cutting to later that night when everyone is asleep, but Sajiri chooses to have a chat with Gabimaru. Weirdly, Gabimaru asks if Sajiri is feeling better, catching Sajiri off guard as Gabimaru seems to care for her. Gabimaru says he'll face the Iwagakure if they invade the island, and once he leaves the island, he'll live the rest of his life with Yui, something Sajiri finds admirable. Sajiri asks how Gabimaru can be so strong, but Gabimaru says he can sense great potential in Sajiri herself. Unable to pinpoint exactly what it is, but Gabimaru's instincts tell him that Sajiri is strong. Seeing as Gabimaru believes in her, we cut to the next day, where Genji offers to escort Sajiri back to her boat, but Sajiri says she won't be leaving. Sajiri still remembers the prejudice she received from her peers and parents during her upbringing as a woman, especially since women were never meant to wield a blade, nor have the right to lead their clan. But Genji can't understand what Sajiri is feeling. Sajiri cries that she wants to live as a samurai, swiftly bowing to Genji as she pleads for Genji to allow her to live her life how she sees fit. But Genji says he can't bear to listen to such nonsense. as Genji draws his blade to knock some sense into Sajiri. Sajiri swiftly disarms and steals Genji's blade, pissing him off as he refuses to be made fun of. But before things can escalate, Rokuruda appears, ripping a hole in Genji's stomach. In the past, we see that Rokuruda would always eat, eventually growing up and being unable to control his powers to a point where he slayed his own parents. In the present, Genji had pushed Sajiri away from Rokuruda's attack, tanking the entirety of the blow as he was flung brutally into a tree. Seeing as Genji is on the brink of death, Genji cries for Sajiri to run, but Rokuruda has snuck up on her preparing to attack. Right on cue, Gabimaru appears, knocking Rokuruda aside, horrifying Sajiri when she realizes Aizen was meant to be watching over the giant. Seeing as Rokuruda is clearly agitated and unharmed, Gabimaru declares he'll have to take the bout seriously. And seeing as Shinobi Rule 9 is accurately analyzing enemies' abilities, Gabimaru says he'll test to see what Rokuruda is capable of. In a mere second, Rokuruda rips a tree out from the ground, nonchalantly launching it towards Gabimaru. And as he evades, he cries for Sajiri to get to safety and leave Genji's body. Gabimaru is a little annoyed that Yuzuriha is watching idling by, something she is proud of as she begins cheering Gabimaru on, and seeing as Rokuruda has only brute strength, Gabimaru says he'll only have to focus on predicting Rokuruda's swings. Strangely, Rokuruda begins changing up the speed in which he attacks, forcing Gabimaru to stay on the defensive, as he realizes that Rokuruda is more capable than he seems. Testing out a theory, Gabimaru employs his stone-throwing technique, but the deadly projectiles simply bounce off Rokuruda's thick exterior. Seeing as Gabimaru's other ninjutsus are basically useless against such a formidable opponent, we cut to Sajiri, who desperately tries to stop Genji's bleeding, but Genji says it's too late. Genji takes the chance to point out how nurturing Sajiri is, but Sajiri cries she has always wanted to embody the responsibilities of both men and women, shocking Genji as he finally realizes what Sajiri was trying to tell him earlier. Genji chooses to give Sajiri his blade, an item that is meant to represent a warrior's soul, and seeing as Rokuruda probably slayed Aizen, Sajiri must be the one to take the giant down. Back with Gabimaru, he is unable to get close to use his flames on Rokuruda, fearing that he'll be snuffed out the moment he gets too close. But surprisingly, one of Rokuruda's fingers are severed, revealed to have been Sajiri who had targeted one of Rokuruda's joints. Seeing as Rokuruda does have weak points after all, both Sajiri and Gabimaru agree to work together, all while Senna says he would like to tend to Genji's wounds, but Yuzuriha calls Senna out for telling a bold-faced lie. Yuzuriha says they can flee if the others lose, and seeing as Rokuruda's finger wound has already stopped bleeding, Gabimaru says they'll cut Rokuruda at the legs to make him kneel only to take the giant down with a single blow to his neck. As Gabimaru draws Rokuruda's attention, he buys time for Sajiri to sneak over to Rokuruda's legs, but her slash fails to breach the giant's skin. Seeing as her attack was filled with emotion, Sajiri says she needs to rid herself of all emotions, all whilst Rokuruda retaliates with some projectiles of his own. Although our duo can evade, Gabimaru notes his fatigued legs. As for Sajiri, she still fails to make a cut on Rokuruda's body. Sajiri cries they need to make Rokuruda kneel over before she can cut his nape, but suddenly Rokuruda's stomach begins to growl, causing the giant to bawl his eyes out as his cries create deafening sound waves. With everyone in the vicinity covering their ears, Gabimaru is suddenly caught off guard as Rokuruda pounds him into the ground. And even though Gabimaru seems fine, he suddenly begins spewing out blood as the impact from the single attack was too much for him. Seeing as Gabimaru is unable to move, Sajiri rushes to intercept Rokuruda's next attack, and as she sees her life flash before her eyes, she comes to the realization that her attacks can both be filled with emotion and reason. Masterfully, Sajiri manages to parry Rokuruda's next attack, only to duck a second incoming slam. Taking a deep breath, Sajiri braces and calms her mind, emitting an aura that frightens Gabimaru all whilst impressing Yuzuriha, as Senta says her ranking was originally meant to be 12th. Senta admits that Sajiri was placed last due to her status as a woman, but after she has removed any hesitation, it's apparent that her skills surpass even most masters. As Sajiri brawls with Rokuruda head-on, Gabimaru is completely blown away by how Sajiri is moving, and when Rokuruda loses footing and falls on his back, Sajiri rushes to capitalize. Sadly, Rokuruda leaps away before Sajiri can slice his neck, but seeing as Gabimaru is back online, Gabimaru says they'll need to employ a high-risk tactic to take down the giant. Stepping up, Gabimaru sets his heart ablaze, only to begin infusing each of his attacks with his purgatory flames. Kicking various flaming rocks, swinging a fiery tree, and even blowing a breath of flame towards the giant, Gabimaru begins to set the surrounding area on fire. Having realized what Gabimaru was planning, Yuzuriha and Senate are seen fleeing the scene, all whilst Gabimaru's flames spread rapidly throughout the island. Yuzuriha had realized that the smoke from the flames would ultimately rise up and begin suffocating Rokuruda due to his tall stature, and seeing as they'll be able to outlast the giant by keeping low to the ground, our duo watches as Rokuruda coughs and cries out in agony. Giving in, Rokuruda finally collapses to his knees, squirming and gasping for air, but this gives Sajiri the perfect chance to cut his neck. When Rokuruda tries attacking Sajiri, Gabimaru blocks and pins Rokuruda to the ground, allowing Sajiri to calm herself and perfectly decapitate the giant. As Rokuruda's life flashes before his eyes, we learn that Rokuruda was actually cursed by extreme hunger, something that led him to be alone his entire life. As a last act of sympathy, Sajiri graciously asks Rokuruda to sleep for eternity, but Gabimaru is more concerned about the vicious flames encasing them. Seeing as they must flee the scene, Gabimaru leads the way for Sajiri, and seeing as both Genji and Aizen have passed, Sajiri promises to live and carry on their legacies. Not even a few minutes later, our duo hide from the statue monsters that seem to be heading over to the fire they created, strange seeing as animals normally avoid danger at all costs. Gabimaru says they have no choice but to continue deeper to where the monsters just came from, and seeing as they need to find the elixir as soon as possible, both Gabimaru and Sajiri begin bolting in the same direction. Coincidentally, they meet up with Yuzuriha and Senta, who seem to be mindlessly staring off into the distance. And when Gabimaru and Sajiri join them, they all become speechless upon discovering a village on the island. Cutting over to Chobei, he is seen drinking the blood of the monsters he's slain, all whilst Toma explains the possibility of hermits and outcasts that may live on the island. Suddenly, Chobei detects some movement off in the distance, and when our brothers head over to inspect the sound of the noise, they're horrified to see two seductive-looking beings embracing each other. Taofar and Ju-Far glare at the brothers when they realize they're being watched, both suddenly speaking as they demand to know how humans have made it to their location. But before Tao can invite the brothers to join them, Ju declares they will eradicate the brothers. Back with Gabimaru, he says they need to figure out if the inhabitants of the village are their enemies, all whilst a mysterious figure listens in on their conversation. Immediately, Gabimaru turns to face the figure, prompting the figure to run off, but Gabimaru sprints after them. Pulling off their hood, Gabimaru lays eyes on a child, but out of nowhere a bonsai-looking monster attacks Gabimaru, buying the girl enough time to flee the scene. Gabimaru cries that the girl may be their only hope at learning more about the island, choosing to leap towards the tree monster, only to kick it towards the others as he continues after the girl. Sajiri chooses to run after Gabimaru, leaving Senta and Yuzuriha to deal with the tree creature. And seeing as it's her time to shine, Yuzuriha tosses away Senta's glasses, only to gulp down a liquid that makes her pores ooze out a strange substance. With Gabimaru hot on the girl's tracks, he manages to catch up to her, noting how familiar she is when navigating the island. When the girl tries striking Gabimaru, he nonchalantly catches her hand, but surprisingly, she manages to flip and restrain Gabimaru, something extraordinary for her size. Sajiri tries calling out to the girl, reassuring her that they mean no harm, and when the girl stops to face Sajiri, she is revealed to have charged up a punch. As the little girl swings her mighty fist, Gabimaru swiftly intercepts the blow, but he still receives the impact from the punch, an abnormal occurrence similar to the strength Rokuruda exhibited. Having barely been able to keep conscious, Gabimaru is pissed that the little girl is giving them so much trouble, choosing to retrieve some vines only to bind and string the girl up. Funnily enough, Gabimaru's cold glare causes the girl to cry, allowing Sajiri to step in and nurture her. As Yuzuriha comes to fetch her duo, she reports that she was able to take down the tree monster, and as the gang waits for the girl to warm up to them, Huko the tree monster suddenly asks for Mei to be returned to them. Huko promises to take them to their village and feed them, and seeing as their village has a bath, our gang gladly follow Huko back to its village. Although skeptical, Gabimaru says this may lead to more information on the elixir, and upon reaching the abandoned, mist-looking village, Huko says they'll show off their home to the gang. Strangely, Huko says their village was very different 1,000 years ago, shocking the gang to see such antique-looking items in Huko's home. As Mei wakes up, Yuzuriha demands to take a bath first, completely melting away her sorrows as she indulges in a hot, steamy bath. Gabimaru is annoyed they're taking a break, but Sajiri seems to have been swayed by the hot bath as well, gladly joining Yuzuriha as she feels guilty for taking a break while still on the job. As Mei hands a girl some towels, we cut over to Sinta, who yearns to take a sip of water, but Gabimaru says they need to be careful. When Huko presents an assortment of plump fruits, Sinta can't help but drool, but although Gabimaru is hesitant, Huko says they aren't poisoned. Gabimaru asks how Huko knows Mei, but Huko refuses to answer, and before Gabimaru can ask about the location of Elixir, the entire gang sits down to enjoy a meal like a family. Huko starts by revealing that the land they're on is called Kotaku, and it's a location that Huko has lived on all their lives. Gabimaru asks if the elixir truly exists, something Huko confirms as it is commonly known as tan on the island, but Gabimaru demands to know where they can find it. Huko starts by explaining that the island is comprised of 3 regions, an outer region comprised of shore and woods known as Aishu, the middle section where the current village is located called Hojo, and finally the inner section filled with mist called Horai, and is also where they'll be able to locate the elixir. Gabimaru gets quite excited seeing as he'll get to reunite with Yui, but he is still skeptical, asking Huko if he can provide any proof. Huko says the immortal Tensins are beings that can never perish or age, and they're the primary proof that the elixir exists. And as we follow the brothers, they're seen helplessly fighting off against Ju, one of the Tensin. Huko says the monsters they fought prior are known as Sashins, whereas the Tensin are completely on another level, a disturbing fact since the Tensin won't allow any humans to leave the island. With Ju slaughtering Chobei and Toma, we see Gabimaru demand to know more about the Tensin, but Huko says they're beings that can command the Sashin and punish the guilty, and by turning the corpses of the people they slay into flowers, the Tensin can create more elixir. With Toma and Chobei being tossed into a pit filled with deformed humans, he desperately tries to free Chobei from being wrapped up in roots, all whilst Huko shows off the regenerative blessing he received from the elixir. When Gabimaru tries interrogating Mei, Sajiri and Yuzuriha scold him for doing something so inhumane, cutting to later that day, where Gabimaru is heading to take a bath. Gabimaru is weirded out seeing as Sajiri still needs to monitor him, but the duo are still unable to wrap their heads around the concept of the immortal Tensins, especially since Senna had pointed out that most of the concepts on the island are foreign Taoist terms. Regardless, Gabimaru says he needs to clean off first, but upon entering the bathhouse, they realize Mei is already inside. Gabimaru could care less seeing as people of all ages and genders would bathe together in his village. But when Sajiri inspects Mei's body, she is saddened to see both Gabimaru and Mei's bodies in rough shape. Taking charge, Sajiri says Gabimaru will need to scrub his body first, only to turn to Mei, suddenly applying a mix of oil and ash to help clean out her hair. Although Gabimaru doesn't like the idea of taking breaks, he still remembers a time when Yui would help him wash his back, all whilst telling Gabimaru to relax when he can, that way he'll be ready when he needs to fight. Gabimaru also remembers how his wife would conceal her face scar with her hair, something he had asked Yui to stop doing, especially since such trivial things don't bother him, and such a declaration meant a lot to Yui. In the present, Gabimaru asks Mei to be proud of the scar she's received as well, something that ultimately makes Mei warm up to Gabimaru, as he actually doesn't seem that scared